What you are about to hear could fundamentally change how you think about property in Britain, and if you are not paying close attention right now, you could find yourself on the wrong side of the biggest shift the UK housing market has seen in over 15 years. This is not speculation, this is not hype, this is happening right now across every region from Cornwall to the Scottish Highlands, and the ripple effects are already being felt by millions of ordinary people who had no idea this was coming. If you are serious about understanding what is really going on with UK property and you want daily updates that cut through the noise, subscribe to UK Housing Watch right now, because the next few months are going to be absolutely critical for anyone with a stake in housing, whether you own, rent, buy, or invest. Now let me break down exactly what just happened. The UK property market has officially entered a new phase that economists are calling the Great Recalibration. And here is what that means in plain English for you and your family. For the first time since the global financial crisis, we are seeing a perfect storm of conditions that are forcing buyers, sellers, landlords, and renters to completely rethink their strategies. Mortgage rates have been on a wild journey over the past 18 months, and just when everyone thought they knew where things were heading, lenders have started behaving in ways that nobody predicted. Major high street banks have been adjusting their products almost weekly, some cutting rates to attract business, while others are tightening criteria so much that even well-qualified buyers are being turned away. This is creating chaos on the ground. Estate agents across the country are reporting that chains are collapsing at record rates because mortgage offers are expiring before sales can complete. And here is the part nobody is talking about. The average time from offer accepted to completion has now stretched to over 5 months in many areas, which means buyers are having to reapply for mortgages multiple times during a single transaction, often at completely different rates than they originally budgeted for. Think about what that means. Someone who agreed to buy a 3-bedroom semi in Manchester back in January might now be facing monthly payments that are £200 or £300 higher than they planned, and that is pushing some families to the absolute breaking point. But wait, it gets more complicated. While this chaos is unfolding in the sales market, the rental sector is experiencing something that can only be described as a perfect storm of pressure. Rental demand has hit levels that we have not seen in decades, and in cities like Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, and obviously London, landlords are receiving dozens of applications within hours of listing a property on Rightmove or Zoopla. You might think this is great news for landlords, but here is the twist that most analysts are missing entirely. The combination of new EPC regulations, rising mortgage costs on buy-to-let products, and the gradual removal of tax relief on mortgage interest has pushed thousands of smaller landlords to sell up completely. The amateur landlord who bought a flat as a pension plan is now doing the maths and realizing that after council tax, maintenance, insurance, and void periods, they are barely breaking even or actually losing money each month. This exodus of smaller landlords is reducing the available rental stock at exactly the moment when demand is exploding, and the result is rents spiraling upward in a way that is genuinely frightening for anyone who relies on the private rental sector. I spoke to a letting agent in Bristol last week who told me they had a 2-bedroom flat come onto the market at £850 a month, which was already £50 above the previous tenant's rent, and within 24 hours they had received over 90 inquiries and eventually let it for £925 to a professional couple who offered 6 months' rent up front just to secure the property. This is now normal in major cities, and if you are a renter trying to find somewhere affordable, the competition is brutal and getting worse by the week. Now let us talk about first-time buyers, because they are caught in an impossible position that perfectly illustrates why this market shift is so significant. The Help to Buy scheme is gone. Shared ownership remains complicated and often poor value, and the deposit requirements for a decent mortgage rate are higher than ever. A first-time buyer trying to purchase a modest 2-bedroom flat in the southeast needs a minimum of £30,000 saved just to access rates that make the monthly payments affordable, and in London that figure jumps to £50,000 or more. Meanwhile, rents are so high that saving becomes almost impossible. Here is the cruel irony that keeps me up at night when I think about the younger generation. A 28-year-old paying £1,400 a month in rent could comfortably afford a mortgage of £1,200 on a property worth £300,000, but they cannot get that mortgage because they cannot save the deposit while paying £1,400 in rent. They are trapped in a cycle that benefits nobody except perhaps the landlords who are still in the game, And even those landlords are facing pressures that make their position increasingly precarious. Speaking of precarious positions, let us discuss what is happening with homeowners who bought during the stamp duty holiday or the low-rate frenzy of 2021 and early 2022. Hundreds of thousands of these homeowners are now approaching the end of their fixed-rate deals and facing what the industry is calling the mortgage cliff. Someone who locked in at 1.5% for 5 years is about to roll onto a rate of 4.5 or even 5%, and the difference in monthly payments can be staggering. On a £250,000 mortgage, that shift could mean an extra £500 or £600 every single month. And here is the part that should genuinely concern policymakers. Many of these households budgeted their entire lives around a lower payment. They chose their car, their childcare, their lifestyle based on having a certain amount of disposable income, and now that income is about to evaporate almost overnight. Some will cope by cutting back, but others will not be able to absorb the hit, and that is when we start seeing the figures that nobody wants to talk about publicly. Repossession numbers are already creeping upward, and while they remain low by historical standards, the trajectory is concerning. Lenders are quietly preparing for a wave of mortgage arrears cases over the next 12 to 18 months, and if unemployment rises even slightly during this period, we could see those numbers accelerate rapidly. Now, I want to address pensioners and older homeowners because they are often forgotten in these discussions, but they are facing unique challenges that deserve attention. Many retired homeowners are sitting on properties worth £500,000 or more, but have modest pension incomes that make maintaining those properties increasingly difficult. Council tax, insurance, energy bills, and basic maintenance costs have all increased dramatically, and a growing number of older homeowners are finding themselves asset-rich but cash-poor in the most literal sense. Some are exploring equity release products, but these come with significant downsides that are not always explained clearly, and I have heard too many stories of families discovering after a parent passes away that there is almost nothing left of the estate because compound interest on equity release has consumed the majority of the property value. Others are considering downsizing. But here is another twist that catches people off guard. The stamp duty on purchasing a smaller property can be substantial. The moving costs add up quickly, and in many areas the gap between a large family home and a suitable retirement property is not as big as people assume, especially when you factor in that bungalows and accessible ground floor flats command premium prices because demand from downsizers exceeds supply. Let me bring this back to the bigger picture, because understanding the macro forces is essential for making smart decisions. What we are witnessing is a fundamental repricing of housing relative to incomes, and this repricing is happening unevenly across different segments of the market. New builds are facing particular pressure because developers who bought land at peak prices are now finding that the numbers simply do not work with higher construction costs and lower buyer demand. Several major house builders have already scaled back their targets, and planning delays are making the situation worse because by the time a development finally gets approved, the market conditions have often changed completely from when the project was originally conceived. This is creating an interesting dynamic where new build supply is actually falling at a time when we desperately need more homes, and that supply constraint will eventually feed back into prices in ways that might surprise people who are expecting a prolonged downturn. Here is my honest assessment of where things go from here, and I want to be clear that nobody has a crystal ball, but based on everything I'm seeing in the data and hearing from people on the ground, the most likely scenario is continued volatility with significant regional variation. Areas with strong employment, good transport links, and limited supply will hold their value or even see modest gains over the next year.